Man, let's talk about Clash of the Champions 1, the very first one, March 27th, 1988, from the Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina. Of course, this is the home of Starrcade and Jim Crockett Promotions. But March 27th, 1988 is a pretty special day because it's also the day that WrestleMania 4 is being offered on pay-per-view. The Clash, of course, is on free TV on TBS. Let's dive right into it. We know the backstory. When Starrcade 1987 was coming to pay-per-view, Vince McMahon felt like, hey, you're encroaching on my territory. I created pay-per-view and I'm going to leverage these pay-per-view cable systems to not carry your show if they want WrestleMania. And I'm going to create my own pay-per-view. I'm going to create Survivor Series. So he created Survivor Series to hurt Starrcade. And then when you guys said, okay, fine, we'll pick a new date, we'll have a new show, and we'll do it in January with Bunkhouse Stampede. He says, okay, cool. Have fun. I'll run another pay-per-view. And this time the pay-per-view companies say, no, can't do that. So they create the Royal Rumble and give it away for free on the USA Network. Fast forward 2 months later, it's now time for the WWF's big show. The big annual WrestleMania extravaganza is already established as a bona fide draw and sensation in the pay-per-view market. And Jim Crockett says, okay, enough of that. Now it's our turn. And he creates Clash of the Champions to go head to head with WrestleMania and on free TV. Man, I love the spirit of competition in this back and forth. Do I have the history and the backstory of that pretty close?
Yeah, pretty close. Obviously, McMahon was very interested in making sure that WCW did not grow. It's akin to what he's doing now, or attempting to do now with AEW, just to do what he can to prevent the unabated growth of the brand. And unfortunately for him, he picked a time where his business is somewhat interesting to a lot of people, as based on the ratings. And so timing for him on this one was not real good. But you're right on the money there. It's just the spirit of competition is the way to go. And the thing about it is that, McMahon is a great strategist in that respect back in those days, but free TV will ace out a paid event anytime. Because to the average Joe, Conrad, wrestling is wrestling in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And if it's free wrestling, that's automatically better than paid wrestling. So I think you're right on the money on how he presented this damn thing.
The brainchild rather of Clash of the Champions, is that all Jim Crockett? Is it David Crockett? Is it Turner? Is it Dusty? Who says, fuck this, let's fire back?
Well, I think it was a collective effort. It wasn't a one-man decision. It may have been one person's germ of an idea that other people shared in the spirit of, but I think Turner themselves had a lot to do with it, because why wouldn't they? They got a lot, 2 hours or whatever it was. I think it was 2 hours of television time in prime time. So they got to preempt stuff. They got to move things around. They got to create promos. We got to create a buzz to this thing, and then have to get a venue and all these other issues, naturally. So it was a collective effort. I'm sure Dusty obviously had a huge hand in booking the card, because he was the booker. Crockett, I'm sure, was the guy that was leveraging and talking to TBS and informing them as to what how their brand WCW was being attacked in their world. So it was I got to think it's a collective effort. There were a lot of people involved that had some skin in the game, but I'm glad they did it. And for me, again, as I said earlier, personally, shoot, man, that was a big deal for me to be on that show with Tony. It was, and I think Dusty made the decision to put Tony and I together. Jimmy Crockett obviously blessed it. Turner certainly blessed it, the network. But to have two play-by-play guys doing your first ever live primetime free show, a little risky. I mean, are we going to meld or mesh? All that. So I think we did. And but it was monumental for a lot of reasons, which I'm sure we're going to get into.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I guess we should sort of start from the beginning. This is all according to the Wrestling Observer. Actually, the story I got in the case of Hayes is that he and Crockett agreed to terms of a contract a long time ago, but Crockett never actually signed it. Hayes put the pressure on for the contract to be signed because he wasn't making any money in JCP without the contract, and he wound up being fired for missing Cincinnati on January 23rd. Morton and Gibson apparently were asked to do an angle where the sheepherders would shave Ricky's head bald, but he refused to go along with it, which may have led to their ousting as well. And Hayes also had his record album covered in the contract, and that Crockett was to promote the album on TV in exchange for a cut of the sales. And a Charlotte newspaper reported that Morton and Gibson had severed ties with the NWA midweek, and the Charlotte offices received lots of calls about it. It appears now that Morton and Gibson will be working against the NWA for Jerry Blackwell's group in Georgia, at least part-time, until they land with a major group, which may not be that easy. I suppose Vince could always bring in Ricky to do lead vocals on wrestling album number 3 for his classic Boogie Woogie Dance Hall. So obviously a little tongue in cheek there, but some moving and shaking here. Michael Hayes has been, a big star in wrestling for a while at this point. Obviously the Rock and Roll Express just a couple of years prior to this were main eventing for Crockett all over the country. And now it feels like things are coming to a head. How much of this is based on the financial strain within the Crockett organization, and how much it is based on maybe the promoters losing faith or confidence in these performers, or just wanting to move in a different direction?
I think it was financial. I can't, Michael Hayes was probably miscast in a certain degree. The Freebird Foundation, Roberts and Gordy and Michael, was getting a little fragile because Gordy had his lucrative Japan gig. Buddy was getting older, and Buddy was Buddy. He just sometimes, Buddy, he trained on Jack Daniels sometimes. So a hell of a hand. He's probably the best of the 3 Freebirds. Buddy Roberts is probably the most well-versed, fundamentally sound guy of the group. It's just the fact that Gordy was, 6'3", 300 pounds, could move like Buddy. And, Buddy had the skills. Michael was a great talker. Michael was a great, charismatic guy. I always thought Michael's future would be that of a really high-level manager at this point in time in his career now I'm talking about, or as a broadcaster. I worked with Michael on UWF television for Cowboy Bill Watts, and I thought he did a hell of a good job. I enjoyed working with Michael. He's sharp. He's quick-witted. He had a natural heel persona. He understood the business. So to me, that was his long-term home. But like a lot of guys, you don't believe it's time, athletically speaking. It's not time. I got more matches in me. My best match hasn't happened yet. Blah blah blah. But as far as the Rock and Roll Express are concerned, first of all, to kill Ricky's image by having his head shaved bald by the sheepherders was ridiculous. I mean, let's stop and think about it. You got arguably one of the top 2 or 3 babyface tag teams of all time, and wanting to screw with that. Getting heat on them, different deal. Having a program with the sheepherders, different deal. But to cut his hair, something that drastic, you need to do that with a team that's red hot. You can't do that to make the team red hot. The team's got to be red hot, i.e. the sheepherders. They were not. So it was a bad choice of booking, in my opinion. And as good as Morton and Gibson were, they're still better than most teams at this stage of their life in their 60s. Just because they're just that skilled. They know what the hell they're doing. They're skilled craftsmen.